Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Nathan. I am one of the 3 co-founders of the Election Truth Alliance. And in this video, I'm going to do 2 things. One, I'm going to do a simple how-to tutorial where we'll walk you through how we initially processed data, and we'll show you what is required to do some of our turnout analysis. And then I will go into Iowa and highlight some of the data we have for 4 of their counties and some of the other concerns. So let's jump right into this. In this case, in order to do an analysis, you're going to need voting data. And so the easiest way to get it is many states and many counties will actually put it on their websites. In this case, Iowa puts their website data or their data by county, by precinct on the website, and then you can actually go and you can download it. You want specifically something that you can turn into an Excel document. That'll make it easier for you to process. And then from there, you want specifically precinct level data by vote type. So we have already prepared this for you. In this case, we'll have our 2024 county and precinct level data. You do want the amount of registered voters per precinct. You want the amount of votes per vote type, and then all of the different candidates in their races from president to senator. And then you'll take this and you'll actually divide this up. That's what we've done here. So we took this from Iowa. We pulled out Polk County, which is one of their largest counties. And then we provided all of this data and organized it. So for the first portion, we have the precinct name. We have registered voters. We have candidate A, candidate B, the total votes for the vote type. So this is just absentee voting, which is early voting and mail-in mixed in for Iowa. Then we have calculations. So turnout is calculated by taking the amount of votes and dividing it by the amount of registered voters. And then the percentage of those votes is divided of the candidate A, in this case Harris, and you divide from 239, which is the total absentee votes. And this will get you the percentage of votes across that precinct. And this will get you the turnout of that precinct. So in this case, we have Des Moines, precinct 29. They have 1.6 thousand registered voters, but only 239 voters showed up. So that's about 14% turnout. And then we see of that 14%, the Democrats got 81% and the Republicans got 19% of those votes. That's all that's showing. And then we actually apply some statistical analysis to this, and I'll show you how. So for a turnout analysis, which is looking at turnout versus how many votes they get, we come here and we select these 3 categories. And then we're going to put this into a scatter plot. So easiest chart in Excel is this scatter plot. We don't need these. And what I like to do to make it easier for kind of looking at the data is we're going to separate each candidate. So we have our combined charts. You'll notice the maximum turnout is a little over 40%. This is almost half of the votes in each of these precincts. The other half is election day. And the way you read these charts, the x-axis is that turnout percent that we just graphed. And then the y-axis is the amount of votes, the percentage of votes a candidate is getting per precinct. Each of these dots, there is 2 dots. There is a red, or in this case, a orange, and a blue dot per precinct. And that's what it's showing, as we're seeing here. At this precinct where there was only 10% turnout, the Democrats got 80% of the votes, and the Republicans got somewhere around 18, 19%, 17%. Now we're going to break this out. What we are looking for here, or what we are concerned about, is a normal election where we don't see significant indication of anomalies, right? We don't see any anomalies. Anomalies generally look like a trend or a correlation across multiple precincts. And in this case, we're not really seeing a lot of precincts all changing in a set way. Keep in mind, this is 2 different vote types as well. So you do want to try and get it down to individual vote types and get as precise data as you can. In Nevada, they gave us the actual by machine voting data, which we would like for everywhere. But in this case, Iowa only gives it by precinct. So if we get it by machine, we can be even more precise. But in this case, we don't see a very noticeable trend where any one candidate is growing in the amount of votes they're getting across precincts at lower to higher turnout. And to reiterate what we're actually showing here, we're showing, think of it like a snapshot. So these are all precincts. And so we're looking at the precincts that have only a little bit of turnout and the precincts that have a lot of turnout. And we're saying, is there anything that's happening as turnout had increased across these precincts? For experts such as Sergei Sphilkin, who does the turnout analysis, they say, hey, we have concerns of places that have abnormally higher turnout where only one candidate grew a bunch of votes is a concern because that could be caused by ballot stuffing. And in this case, we don't see any noticeable trends. You still want to dig deeper, but what our analysis is pretty much doing is it's showing, hey, where are the concerns? And then we can look at the demographics and go from there. Now we're going to do this for election day. And I did it for election day already, but we'll just recreate it for you to make it easier. So same thing. You want precinct, registered voters, A and B candidates, total votes by vote type, in this case, election day. And then you do the math for turnout and the candidate vote percentage. Now, we're going to grab these. We're going to put these in a scatter plot. There's a few other types of analysis you can do. You can bin these and you can do some heat map analysis, but that requires a bit more complex tools. In this case, Excel will let you do a very simple scatter plot. So here is Polk County election day. We're going to pull out both candidates so we can see them better, and we'll change the color. Okay, so immediately we notice a concern. We do see an interesting shift in precincts. Instead of more of the straight line per candidate, we see after 40-50% turnout, it looks like we begin to see one candidate's growing in the amount of votes they had across all of these higher turnout precincts, and the other candidate is decreasing in the amount of votes. Here we see it more cleanly. And this is a concern because if you were, well, this is obviously an anomaly. And so according to the analysis of Sergei Sphilkin, Roman Udot's work, the heat maps of Peter Klimek, it is a concern where if you were to want to manipulate elections, you would ballot stuff as one option. Well, in our case, a lot of that would be hard to ballot stuff in the US. It would require you to physically go and hand in ballots. And election day, it's being cast by people and the polls are being watched. Well, our concern is, since we use digital systems, could you digitally ballot stuff and add in a bunch of votes, causing turnout to rise across these precincts and causing the amount of votes for one candidate to grow? And so why or what would that look like? Well, let's say you have 50% turnout here. So let's say you have 500 votes already cast and they're more equally split. We'll actually do 50%. So we're sitting around 50% or so. So you want your candidate to win. You're sitting somewhere around 50%. You have 500 votes in. Let's say you added in 100 votes digitally and 100 votes all for one candidate. That would cause turnout to increase, and that would cause the amount of votes that candidate to get to increase. And so to see this on one precinct or so wouldn't be amazingly weird, but to see this across all precincts is a concern. And so we'll actually jump into Iowa data, and we'll kind of highlight why Iowa is important, but that is how you do a turnout analysis. So now we're going to pull up a PowerPoint. So this is Iowa. Iowa has 6 electoral votes in the Electoral College. It's not a very large state in that case. And some notable highlights is there is a very reputable pollster named Ann Selzer, and the Des Moines Register, which is what a news register that published her polls. And so leading up to the election, she had claimed somewhere around a 3% lead for Harris. I believe her split was somewhere around maybe 3 to 4 swing states out of the 7 could go either way. And so she actually had retired after the election, a decision she claimed she made the year before. But here's what's important. So she was a well-known pollster. She normally wasn't too far off the mark. And yet, for this election specifically, I think she was 16 points off from the actual results. And after the election, President Trump filed a lawsuit in December about her poll being fake news. And then another group did the same. And they actually did specifically quote that her polls delivered the dictionary definition of fake news. So she did get sued twice because of her polls. We did look at her polls. We'll want to do a more deep dive and an official report, but looking at her polling techniques, she's been doing this for a very long time. And she actually, from what we saw, was more conservative in some of the polls that she did in estimating impact than other places. So I do find this interesting that she was very wrong in her polls from the election results. And then she was sued because of those polls. That is strange that you would sue someone for a poll in a race that you did win. So now we're going to look at 4 counties. This heat map here on the right, or this density map, is showing the larger populations. We're going to look at Polk County, which is right here in the middle, the most heavily populated county in Iowa with over 500,000 residents. And then we're going to look at Scott County, which I believe is on here the side. They are the 3rd largest. And then we're going to look at Johnson County, which is right here as well. And they are the 4th largest. And then just to throw it in, because we found the Ann Selzer situation interesting, we're going to look at Des Moines County. And I believe they are the 16th largest county. Final note, as mentioned before, Iowa has 2 major voting types in their data. They have absentee, which is made up of early and mail-in voting. Their early voting is pretty much like mail-in. You just submit it early, the day before, I believe. And then you have election day, which is where you actually go to the polling locations and you poll and you vote. So we're going to highlight one other thing. So we keep bringing this up in our current presentations. People say, hey, if you have concerns of anomalies in our election systems and a potential compromise of the tabulation machines, that wouldn't change the outcome of an election, would it? Right? Every state runs their own elections. Every state performs audits. Well, what we're finding is a majority of the U.S., although they have varying degrees of voting machines, the vote counting computers, the tabulation machines, there's only a handful of predominant brands. And the top 2 brands span 70% of the U.S., specifically the swing states as well. And the concern here is multiple organizations with cybersecurity experts have actually released letters. I know back in November 13th, they released letters with concerns about potential compromises of those tabulation machines and the companies themselves and the brand. Iowa did do some audits at some of their lower races, and we'll highlight that. The concern is if you're doing a small percentage, how are they actually looking at the votes? So if you don't audit 100% of a precinct or such, you may have a hard time actually catching significant manipulation. And in all of the audits we've looked at, they are almost always undersampling and only doing a little bit of the actual vote. And they're not highlighting the larger places where turnout is higher and there are more people voting in bigger cities. And that's where we're seeing a lot of the anomalies, is bigger cities. So these are why we want to highlight. Could you pull this off? Well, it would be difficult to manipulate an election. But could you do it? Well, if you were to do it, it would require compromising these 2 major brands and a few others. And then you could potentially. Now we're going to look at the 2 different types of analysis. We're going to highlight Iowa. So you do have your vote count and your turnout analysis. As I mentioned before, these are moderately based on the work of Roman Udot and Sergei Sphilkin. We did link his paper here. I can actually bring this up in a follow-up. But the main takeaway is we're going to say, what does normal look like? So for the scatter plot, this is kind of what we showed you before, but instead of turnout, it's just votes cast. And so it's the same thing. The x-axis is how many votes were cast per precinct. Each of these dots, there's a red and a blue dot per precinct. Each of these precincts represents a candidate and the amount of votes that candidate got across that precinct. So we see in precincts with more votes, 2,500 per precinct, and precincts with less votes, sub 100 votes or so, we see that both candidates are still somewhat consistent in the amount of votes they were averaging across all of these precincts. We don't see any rapid shifts up or down as more people had voted. And let me clarify, there is no time component in this. It is a snapshot. This is pretty much the results of all the precincts after all of the voting is done. So in this case, mail-in votes could be submitted, on multiple days or multiple weeks. But all we're highlighting is we're saying if you were to aim to manipulate, would you add in votes? And if we're seeing places where you're adding in a bunch of votes, all for one candidate, you would see that candidate growing and shifting up into the right or so. We don't see that for California, San Mateo County for the 2024 election. We don't see that for their mail-in. And then here's their election day. And then the same thing. We don't see a noticeable shift or trend across all precincts after a certain point. We see both candidates sit somewhere consistently around a certain percentage. I do want to highlight there is some variance in the beginning, which is normal. These are really small votes per precinct. So you're going to get some precincts with a lot of votes for one candidate and the other, you only have a handful of votes there. And then as we grow in the amount of votes across the precincts that have a lot of votes, we still see a more of a straight line, a more of a consistent pattern for both candidates. Now, we highlight that because now I'm going to pull up our dashboard and show you Iowa and a few other places. And so here's that dashboard. And then what we're going to do is we're going to pull up Iowa first. Nope, that's Ohio. We're going to pull up Iowa first, and we're going to go to the biggest county, which is Polk County, 24 election. And then when we look at this as a scatter plot, we see generally the same thing. And we can actually make this and stretch this out just a little bit. We don't see significant growth for either candidate in places where more votes were cast or places where less votes were cast, and places where turnout was higher. So nothing very suspicious here, no major anomalies. But now we'll look at election day for Polk County. It becomes more clear. In precincts where there was higher turnout, Trump had received more and more of those votes. People will ask me, hey, is this indicative of a really popular candidate? Well, the problem is, and as we've shown you, generally speaking, you should average across all precincts. And so, yes, you could have really popular candidates in a few precincts, really red precincts that will sit higher or lower. But to see all of the precincts shifting and turnout is increasing, their votes is increasing, this does not traditionally happen with normal human voting behavior. As per the work of, for example, Sergei Sphilkin, and he is a well-known European election expert. His analysis warns us, and they use line charts, but the thing is, it's similar. He uses turnout, and what they warn us is they warn us of places where turnout rapidly increases could be caused by, let's say as we said before, let's say you sit somewhere around 50% turnout and you want to win. So across all of the precincts after 50% turnout, you add in 10 or 20% of the votes, and they're all for one candidate. And that's going to cause this shift where the candidate is growing in the amount of votes they're getting in places of higher turnout. And that is the concern. And we can actually see that with our analysis. So we'll pull up the bar charts. So we see in the beginning, the Democrats are sitting at a higher percentage of the votes across these precincts at a lower turnout. And then precincts where there's higher turnout after 50% or so, if you were to add in votes, you would cause turnout to increase. And if you were to add in votes for only one candidate, you would cause their percentage of votes to jump up. And we do see that anomaly and that concern here in Polk County. And then to highlight this further, so Peter Klimek, he came up with a heat map analysis, Peter Klimek and his other co-authors. And he is arguing the same concern of if you were to potentially manipulate an election, you would need to impact multiple precincts. And so he creates us this heat map analysis. And what we want to highlight here is he's looked at multiple elections in multiple countries. And it's the same type of analysis we're doing, where you're looking at turnout on the bottom per graph. And then you're looking at the percentage of votes for the winners. And so a free and fair election should look something more like a circular ball, like the Czech Republic, more like Romania. And in the case of potential manipulation, we see a comet trail, as you would say, up and to the right in Russia's 2012, 2011 elections. And in Uganda, we see a significant amount of votes actually shifted up and to the right, which is interesting. Then a spike sitting at almost 100% turnout. And so this is interesting. And what we're going to highlight then is we're going to do this for Polk County, Iowa. So we did generate a way to do that. We're going to get rid of Harris. And in this case, we'll look at absentee again. So absentee, we see a bit more of that ball. It is spread out pretty interestingly, but we see a bit more of a circular ball. And in the case then of election day, we see a comet trail up and to the right for these precincts. So we're seeing that in all of these precincts, as turnout had increased, in places of higher turnout, we begin to see this up and to the right pattern. And people will ask me, well, maybe this is just unique to our elections. Well, I'm going to show you California again, and I'll show you their heat map for San Mateo County, and we'll do election day. So we see election day for them. It still sits a little bit more of a ball. Caveat here is because mail-in, well, I guess in this case, mail-in should sit a little higher. Here we go. We still see a bit more of a ball. We don't see all of the precincts shifting up and to the right. A majority of their votes were mail-in this case in San Mateo. And then their election day and early voting combined is a really small amount. So I believe if we increase the bin size, do we get a little bit better of a distribution? It's harder to see it, but the main concern is there's so little of their votes is here that you kind of get squished up against the margin of 0%. But we still see a bit more of that ball. We don't see a spike up and to the right. And there are other places as well, like Ohio, or I like Pennsylvania, Erie. We look at their mail-in. Theirs is a really good example. They're sitting somewhere between 10 to 20%, and we still get a bit more of that ball. So we'll go back to Iowa, and we're going to highlight another county, but that was the major concerns is we're saying, hey, if absentee looks more normal, their election days do show the anomalies that are seen in other analysis. So next up, we'll look at Scott County. Absentee, we get more of that straight line for both candidates. Election day, we get the same concern of a downward trend for the Democrats and an upward trend for the Republicans across all of these precincts with a higher turnout versus precincts with a lower turnout. And then when we go and turn this into a bar chart, we still see that same shift after a certain point. The candidate begins to grow in the amount of votes, and we look at them as on a heat map. We see that downward shape and trend and that upward to the right shape as well. Absentee, we see a bit more of a ball. The more precincts you have, the more clean or clear this ball should become. All right, Scout, let's look at Johnson County. Absentee, same concern here. We do see a slight upward trend here. Keep in mind as well, when this is two different vote types and you want a lot of precincts, we don't have a huge amount of precincts across all of these counties. They're not as big as Nevada's analysis, where we get a more full distribution. Pennsylvania as well has a lot more precincts. But if we look at their election day, we see a very drastic diagonal shift. Becomes across. In this case, the Republican candidate is growing in the amount of votes they're getting significantly across places of higher turnout. And then the same thing, we'll show this as a bar chart. You see the cross begin. You see a steady increase up until 39, 40% turnout. And then the Republicans begin to win at those higher turnout precincts. And then we have our heat map. Same concern here, just visualizing in a different way. You have this up and to the right. As we mentioned, this looks more like what Russian elections are concerned about, up and to the right, and then places sitting at almost 100% turnout is very weird. We don't have any places that are sitting at 100% turnout here. We generally never see anything above 80% for many places we have been looking. But it's this shape that is a concern. Okay, and then last but not least is Des Moines County. We'll go to their absentee. They may not have enough precincts to truly get a good representation, but we do see a little bit of more of a straight line, but it is, as I said, it's kind of hard to tell. They don't have a large amount of votes, but we do see the same trend we've seen across other places, where places of low turnout versus places of high turnout, the Democrats begin to significantly lose, and then the Republicans begin to significantly grow. And I want to highlight one other thing. So Polk County, one of the largest counties in the state. And so what is even more concerning about this is if we're seeing places, larger precincts, a lot of people will say, hey, I have a concern if turnout is based on how many people could vote in a place. Well, if you have really small precincts, if you have really small precincts and a candidate is really popular in those small rural precincts, and they're sitting at a higher turnout, would that cause the effects we are seeing? That is an excellent question. And let's look at Trump's portion of his votes. And we'll actually make this a little more easy to see here. We'll stretch this out a little bit. Then we'll get rid of Harris. Okay, so they asked us smaller precincts, higher turnout. So what we've done is we've actually made the dot size relative to the amount of votes cast. And so, yes, we do see smaller precincts where Trump has a larger percent. But in this case, we're looking at precincts still with hundreds of votes. And it's not any one precinct or the smaller precincts. What we're seeing is all of the precincts are changing. Even the larger precincts, such as, this one has 2,000 votes. So this is a larger precinct. And the concern here is if your population is more rural in nature, then would you not expect to see, if anything, the party that is more city-based, that is more urban, that lives on top of each other? You would expect to see places with more people generally shifting for the Democrats in this case. But what we're seeing is the opposite. We're seeing that abnormal trend, whereas in precincts where there were more votes cast, Trump was getting and continues to gain in the amount of votes he's getting until he begins to overtake the Democrats, even in the larger precincts. And this is a concern. It's not just a few precincts, it's all of the precincts. And the thing is, to change all of the precincts so uniformly would be very, very difficult naturally. This isn't reflective of human voting behavior. As we showed you before, with a more normal election, it's going to look more like what California has. Or if we want to look at Erie County, I love Erie County. Their mail-in and their election day. It's just so good to look at. Sorry, we go to Pennsylvania, we go to Erie. And to close this out, we're going to look at their mail-in again in the turnout analysis. And we still get that more of a straight line, like we have seen in California, like we've seen in other places. So I think this is really important to show we're not seeing any rapid growth or decrease as turnout increases. But then in election day, which is always very interesting, we do see that concern, even in Erie County, even in other places. So I think that will somewhat conclude our analysis of Iowa. Here is one other thing. If you want to look at the heat maps, we did a state board for Ohio, and we do see that more circular shape as seen by their analysis. And so to summarize, key takeaways. So I showed you how to do your own turnout analysis using Excel, what data requirements you're going to need. Most important is you need by precinct and by vote type data, and you need the registered voters per precinct. And that will allow you to do a turnout analysis like what we've been doing. And then Our work, as we said, is based upon the work of Roman Udot, Sergei Sphilkin, and Peter Klimek, who have all published their papers, and we reference them in our work. And then, of course, we say all of this to highlight a few things. One, we want audits. For these anomalies, if they are caused by potential vote manipulation, that can truly only ever be determined by doing an audit, by looking at the paper votes. And we can break down the demographics and we can highlight even more anomalies. But ultimately, it comes down to audits. And so that is what we've been pushing in Pennsylvania with hiring lawyers there and working with plaintiffs there. And that's what we've been working on in other states as well, is working to get audits, to reaching out to the leadership of those states, which is very important for you. We have a audit advocacy toolkit up on our website, and we need help in terms of call them, email your secretaries of state. Pennsylvania secretaries of state have the power to actually conduct an audit and open up the ballot boxes. They do have that power. So Nevada, Pennsylvania, we're going to be releasing North Carolina soon, and then Iowa as well in a formal report. So we want you to be, if you can, reach out to them. Let them know your concerns, right? We elect these people. If our elections are free and fair, they work for us. And so that is very important to highlight, is it's the American people that truly should have the say. You know, your government runs based on our work, our efforts, and our choice. And I will say that we have a treat for you very soon, where a lot of you say, why is no one else talking about this in the election integrity community? Why is no other statistical experts doing, the work? Well, I'll highlight that Smart Elections and Audit USA, some of the groups that we've worked with and talked to, they are fighting this fight too. I know Smart Elections has a lawsuit in New York, I believe, upcoming. New York and New Jersey, one of those two will drop a reference as we know a little bit more, but they are fighting this fight as well. And we will have other people stepping up and joining us soon, we hope. So thank you guys so much. Do not lose hope. And as I will say time and time again, why does this matter, right? Why now? The elections are over. We're done, right? No. Elections in the United States, future elections, need to be free and fair. Past elections need to be free and fair. And if they weren't, you need to figure that out and determine that. And so we want to protect the midterms. We want to protect the next presidential elections. And the work we're doing today with the ETA and all of the amazing volunteers from Lily and Jive to David and Nate, to the others who I can't name because they are anonymous and we care about their privacy. They are doing the work so that we can lay the foundations going forward, that anyone and everyone can understand what normal should look like in an election and provide you the tools to do statistical analysis yourself or use our dashboards and safeguard our elections in the future. We want to highlight that if there is a compromise, we want to make sure everyone is well aware of it so that if it happens again, you can do these techniques and these analysis and you can do these audits within the recount window and determine, hey, was there manipulation? Was there not? And then address it. Because if our elections are not free and fair going forward, the American people are not being represented. The government doesn't represent the American people. The Constitution has been usurped in that case. And so it is your right to vote, and it is your right to have your vote cast and read correctly. So it is a big deal. Do not give in to people saying, oh, whatever, let's just worry about the next time. Keep fighting. And I hope you'll support us because I'm going to keep fighting as well. So thank you guys so much. Until next time.